Okay, I was like, did I make sure the microphone was working? Yes, I didn't. I did not make sure the microphone was working. But that's okay because it's working. So, good. All right. Hey, y'all, I hope you're doing well today. Everything's going as well as it can go. I am going to be working on some Legend of Redneck for a little bit today. Don't know if this is going to be as exciting as a stream as last one. I didn't start on an angel number this time, so who knows, right? But I don't want to put any bad luck into it. Only good luck, only good vibes, right? Only good vibes in the chat, please. All bad vibes will be immediately cursed, and you will you will receive bad vibes back to you threefold. So I wouldn't take that chance. That's what I'm saying. Only good vibes in the chat. Or no vibes. I mean, that's fine too. There's one other thing I wanted to do. No, there wasn't. I just lied to myself. Anyway, so, it's one of those things, as I'm now an adult. Verb says, okay, no geese. Noted. Wait, are you saying that geese bring exclusively bad vibes? I mean, I wouldn't disagree necessarily. I would not disagree necessarily. I find that geese bring kind of a military vibe to wherever they go, which isn't necessarily bad, but I mean, it is kind of like, oh, y'all got an agenda. Geese definitely have an agenda. That's my issue with them. And they walk around everywhere like they own the place. And, they treat your neighborhood like a bathroom. They just have no respect. No respect whatsoever. Especially the Canadian snow geese. They're the worst. Canadian snow geese run amok in the surrounding neighborhoods that I live in. They really do. You see them flying overhead and you're running for cover because, I mean, it's just like, they're hoodlums. Look, I don't want to bring too much bad vibes to geese. They've got as much right to live as any other creature on God's green earth, but they could live somewhere else. I don't know. Somebody likes the geese. Actually, I kind of like the geese, but I kind of don't. I have a weird relationship with geese. Like, I respect their presence, and you kind of have to, because if you don't respect their presence, they're gonna like bring you problems and attack you, and or hiss at you, like they like to do. So you gotta be mindful of that, right? Because like geese sense bad vibes, apparently. So whenever I'm around geese, I always try and keep it chill. Try not to be too whatever it is that gets them, upset. Cuz their thing is, hey, we're going to graze and we're going to eat all the bugs in the grass and whatever the hell else it is we're eating. And don't mess with our turf. And if you do, we're going to make problems. You see? So I don't mess with the geese, especially the Canadian snow geese. They're particularly militant. They're particularly, into their flock. And they're just like, and you'll walk by and you'll see them just like go, wait, hold on. You'll just see them just follow you, like dead stare. Because they're just like, I don't trust this one. I don't like them. And they do that to everybody. So it's like, you're always on alert around them. I guess they're always on alert around you. But I don't think they watch YouTube, so they're not going to really, I don't know, they're not going to really, I mean, I guess I'll find out next time I go on a walk at the park. And suddenly I get a stare down from one of the Canadian snow geese, and then they're like, we heard what you talked about us, eh? You hoser? And they start throwing down the hockey sticks, and it's game over after that. Blood on the sidewalk. So all I'm saying is, this is true about geese. But we have to learn to cohabitate with them, because we don't know how else to get rid of them. They just showed up one day, unannounced. And it's been problems ever since. But, if we go to war with the geese now, it's not going to end pretty. They aren't ones for truces. They aren't ones for sharing. So sometimes you just gotta take what you got, All right, well, y'all get the parks, and then we get literally everything else. I guess that's our arrangement now. And you can just poop on everything. But, nature remains in balance, so long as that's the case. That's geese for you. Oh, I gotta say, I am kind of low energy from the sun in the summer in Louisiana. It is ridiculously hot. And it's only going to be ridiculously hot for another 2 months. 2.5 probably, actually. To nobody's surprise, there's like a hurricane that's popped up pretty early in the hurricane season. The Hurricane Beryl. Hurricane Beryl is a Category 5, like almost right out of the gate. And, I don't know, like, I was concerned about that and then checked up on the forecast, and currently the anticipation is that it may turn into a tropical storm once it enters the Gulf of Mexico. And so here's a little, for those of y'all who don't live in the South and don't live in the, the Gulf Coast area, here's some things that you get to learn about summers in the Gulf of Mexico. So every summer in the Gulf of okay, let me start this way. The weather is generally fine. You get some heavy thunderstorms, you get rain, and then also you get a lot of nice days throughout most of the year. But then the summer comes along, and suddenly everybody, unless you live directly on the coast, right? Like unless you live like in Gulf Shores, Alabama, or the coastline of Florida, pretty much everybody wants to leave the South all at once and go to like Colorado or Colorado. I'm sure there are other places that they want to go, but mostly it's Colorado. And the South becomes a pretty miserable hellhole for about 2.5 to 3 months. It really depends on the year. The last couple of years have been particularly hot for various reasons. We could say climate change, but also, uh, I this might be speculative a little bit, but we are reaching a solar maximum, so I think that might have something to do with it as well, in addition to. And it's just a really hot one. It's just, this year is a really hot year. Last year was a really hot year. In any way, so summers are miserable in the South. Like, they're just terrible. Just awful. Just nobody enjoys it. Like I said, unless you live directly on the coast, and it's very nice. Because, you have the relatively cool air of the Gulf Coast cooling you off, and you get a nice breeze and all that stuff. You don't get, once you go further into the interior of like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and also even Florida, but also especially Texas, it gets hot. It gets, on average into the hundreds, sometimes 108. And it's not just like a dry heat, right? It's not just like, oh yeah, it's 108 in like a convection oven, which isn't that warm. It's like 108 in like a sauna. It's like humid. It's uncomfortable. It's really terrible. And so everybody feels terrible. Just the whole region is just like miserable the whole time. And people go on vacation, but if you're in a situation similar to me, you don't really have much of an opportunity to go on a vacation and get away from the oppressive heat for the most part. You can't like just take a couple months out and just vamoose, right? You stick with it because that's the choice you have. And so anyway, that's just preamble, right? That's just preamble to what I was really want to talk about, which is that also every summer you have hurricane season. And, the reason why we have hurricane season at all is because the waters of, certain regions of the Atlantic, but particularly the Gulf of Mexico, get super warm during the course of the year, but especially during the summer. And if you have like a particularly inactive previous hurricane season, the waters of the Gulf of Mexico get super hot. I say super hot. They're warm. They're like lukewarm bath water warm, which is pretty warm for, a gulf or a sea or an ocean. In the way that hurricanes form, right? They are basically like born out of that really warm water, and they, in a sense, behave almost like air conditioners for large bodies of water, right? Because like what happens is you get the warm water, it causes condensation, the condensation amasses. I don't know what causes the rotation exactly. I don't fully understand that mechanism, but it has something to do with the cycle of you have warm air rise, and then it gets higher and higher and higher up into the atmosphere, and then it cools, and it just kind of like, I don't know, it does something. I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm not a meteorologist. Anyway, I can just say the word convection over and over again to try and explain it. Anyway, so you get these massive storms called hurricanes, and they will just, blow through your neighborhood. And it's kind of like a lottery system as to whose neighborhood it blows through. Sometimes you have relatively inactive hurricane seasons where it's just like a bunch of smaller storms. Maybe it's like Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, which means you get wind speeds going up to as high as about 110 miles per hour, which is pretty, you know, that's like, in other words, gusts. Or it could be gusts of like up to 120, 130 miles per hour and sustained winds of about 110 miles per hour. Category 3s, most towns will be able to withstand them and won't be too impacted by them, but they're still pretty rough. I mean, like, I don't know why I say that. Category 3s are pretty messed up. I think it was a Category 3 that struck my hometown of Lake Charles back in 2020, 2021. I can't quite remember the year, and messed it up pretty bad. Like, Lake Charles is just starting to recover from that hurricane. And that's how bad of a storm these hurricanes are, right? Like, for instance, New Orleans, which is a city that's nearby to where I live, about an hour away, many, many years ago, back in, I think it was 2005. I can't quite remember the year. It's been so long ago now, but it got hit by a hurricane called Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina made landfall in New Orleans. I want to say it was around a Category 5. I don't think it was exactly a Category 5, but it was around a Category 5. It was a bad storm, and really messed the city up. And to give you an indication of how bad it messed the city up, it went from a population of about 1 million to where it is now today, 300,000. So 700,000 people were forced to leave the city because of issues with flooding, destroyed homes. It was a disaster. It was one of the most horrible natural disasters to happen in recent memory. And, the city never really recovered from how bad that storm was. So this is every year, right? Like, you can have perfectly like modest hurricane seasons, and then you'll get one really bad storm that shows up out of nowhere and just, mutilates your town, mutilates your city. Or you could be in the situation that like Lake Charles was in a couple of years ago, where it got hit by 2 hurricanes back to back. One was a Category 3, the other was a Category 1, Category 2. So anyway, you would think if you lived in a region where this happened fairly frequently, that perhaps you would change your building codes and maybe update your buildings and have some sort of program. I don't know, a governmental or some kind of program where you update the strength of your buildings, which you can do. It is feasible engineering in our day and age to make them wind resistant, hurricane resistant, flood resistant, and people don't. For various reasons, people don't. Usually because they can't afford it, which, okay, fair enough. But still, like I said, this happens year in and year out. If it's not Louisiana that gets hit, it's Mississippi that gets hit. If it's not Mississippi that gets hit, it's Alabama, or it's Florida, or it's the Carolinas, or it's Georgia, or it's, Texas. Especially Galveston. Galveston gets hit a lot for some reason. Anyway, you would think, I don't know, maybe I'm a crazy idea. You would think you would find some way to update the building codes where you live. Which actually, I mean, people do, but I'm just saying in a more like overt, active way than how people do it, which is like basically somebody passes a law, right, and says, okay, all commercial building has to be like this kind of hurricane rating, right, and needs to withstand this kind of winds from now on. And then as far as residential properties go, good luck. That's how it goes. Like, just good luck. And then you know, and then you have a disaster happen, and insurance companies lose all their money, and then insurance gets hiked up, and then it kind of goes on and on and on. Anyway, this is the lottery that you play when you live in the Gulf Coast area. It is part of the life here, and it is a little bit crazy. And that's I only bring this up because that's literally every time summer comes around, that thought comes up in the back of my mind. Now I rent where I live, so I have renter's insurance, right? And renter's insurance isn't that expensive. Everything else is expensive, but renter's insurance is not that expensive. But also, like, you know, I'm not I'm not so settled into where I live where it's like, oh, if I lose all this stuff, I'll never recover. It's just like, well, that will suck. Like, um, but you get a lot of situations with people who their home is totally wrecked, right? And it becomes very difficult for them to recover. It becomes like a years long experience of trying to get it together. And so that's the exciting world of living in the Gulf of Mexico, or in the Gulf Coast. You would think somebody would come up with some better ideas of how to deal with living here, right? But nevertheless, here we are. And so we have yet another exciting hurricane season that starts with a very dramatic start with like a category 5 just barreling down barreling its way into the Gulf of Mexico. Um, and like I said, the current forecast is predicting that once Beryl gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it will have ran its energy out going through Mexico and Barbados Islands and all this other stuff to where it's a tropical storm, which a tropical storm is not a big deal. Tropical storm is like 75. I say it's not a big deal, and I'm like, it's 75-mile-per-hour winds, a lot of rain, a lot of thunder. We're actually, most people who live in the Gulf Coast are used to storms like that. They actually happen pretty frequently. I mean, this spring, in Baton Rouge, where I live, we had at least 3 to 4 storms that were, of that rank, but they were much smaller, right? So, like, you get 75-mile-per-hour gusts, but the storm is only like 30 minutes to an hour, is one thing versus 75-mile-per-hour sustained winds and like maybe 80-mile-per-hour gusts over the course of many hours. Well, that's a different thing, but it's still, it's not going to wreck most. It's going to wreck some trees, it's going to wreck some lawns, but it's not going to wreck most people's houses, generally. So, I say all this because this is going to be kind of the background noise of my life probably until November, because like usually hurricane season doesn't usually end until around November-ish. You often get some, actually, to be totally honest, hurricane season doesn't even really pop off usually until around September, October area. But we started early this year, so that'll be fun. Anyway, just finish this panel of Hank, or not Hank, well, technically Hank, Lank, and Hazard eating lunch. And now I'm going to do the panel of them eating dinner. And guess what? I'm kind of cheating because that's kind of part of the joke. I think I'll do it like that. Yeah. So I might even do it. I'm going to change up a couple things. I think when you want to do a joke where it's like you want to have a repeat, you want to at least change up a couple little things here and there so it's not like totally the same. Like maybe even change up some expressions. But I've also noticed that like everything is quieter now that it's summer. It's like the internet became quieter too, which is kind of funny. But I guess it also makes sense. Like people are on vacation. They're doing other things, right? Probably spending more time with friends and family. But as I was griping a moment ago, when I first started this little ramble, or whatever you want to call it, now that I'm an adult, summer is like basically just another part of the year, right? I am going to take some break time off this summer, especially towards the end of July. I'm going to go see some friends in Houston and hang out with them for a couple of days. But other than that, I mean, it's going to be back to the. I've got a lot of stuff I need to finish off in terms of work, in terms of freelance work. I'm not behind on it at all. I'm actually making pretty good progress, but like, I am learning how to deal with this mindset that I've had for a very long time where I want to be done with something early and like I'm learning that I'm actually a little bit more competent where when I take my time and not try and push an early deadline on myself. We'll see how that works for this freelance project that I'm doing. This is honestly like one of the first freelance projects I've done in a while. And it's pretty different because like I'm also doing like meetings. So like, you know, I'll do meetings with the team I'm working with just to make sure we're all on the same page and like discuss sort of the general ideas of like what we're doing cuz basically I'm designing I don't know what to call it other than a mini comic. Verb says minors are at work. You can you can sneak in time typing on a phone in school, not in work. Yeah. That is an interesting little thing to know too, because I have speculated that, but I didn't know that with any sort of like certainty about what it's like in school. In terms of like, do kids have smartphones in schools? I'm sure a lot of kids have laptops, so I'm sure they sneak stuff all the time on their laptops. That's a whole new world for me because I never had a laptop ever in school, not until college. And that was like kind of a big deal. Like basically when I went to college, they were like, you can now carry a laptop with you wherever you go if you want. I was like, golly gee, really? And then, I loaded that laptop with a bunch of like arcade games and really didn't use it for school very much. Like I wrote essays on it, but that was about it. I think I did like a PowerPoint presentation. You know, that was about it. maybe I did. When I went to art school, I might have used it a little bit more for class, but not really. Like most of my art school projects were on paper, so we really didn't do a whole lot of digital stuff. It's kind of funny. I actually really didn't learn how to do digital art until after art school. I took one digital coloring class in art school, which was honestly an inadequate amount. Um, like it was like a digital painting class, and then that was it. Like I didn't learn how to get good at coloring comics really until I got hired to color comics. And that really felt like a complete like accident, quite frankly. Um, because basically what happened is when I made the very first episode of Trailer Park Warlock at my internship, I colored it on my own, and like I had taken a workshop with one of the artists where I was interning, and they taught me basically their method for coloring. Shout out to Ranchan. And basically, their method that they taught for coloring, I've used now for the last 10 plus years, right? Like just basically forever. Um, and it was the colors on that first episode of Trailer Park Warlock, which looking back on now, I think are actually they're okay. I do better work now, but those colors on Trailer Park Warlock were what got me hired to be the colors for the Plants vs Zombies comic book that I would later on work on. And then that's where I really learned how to color was coloring the Plants vs Zombies comics, because that was like that was boot camp, really. I mean, learning how to like keep a deadline and like meet a very difficult standard while coloring very complicated pages to color. I've look, I mean, I would call it indispensable, invaluable experience, right? Because I was able to take that knowledge and carry it on to like everything else that I've done in comics. And it was also pretty brutal. It was a very brutal. It was a brutal experience. I guess it's kind of true. Yeah, it was a brutal experience. I might have to use that word more often. Anyway, it was a brutal experience because, like, through that sheer grinding and just like the 12 to 16 hour work days and all that stuff, I really did learn how to like work much faster and more competently. Because there's this idea I think that I got in my head for sure when I was younger, which was like, oh, well, better art and better work comes from spending more time on it. Kind of true, kind of not true. It depends, right? It also depends on your experience level. That is definitely true when you're just starting, when you're at that grunt level of just like, I don't know how to do this, right? And like, I'm just winging it and like hoping it works and whatever. You're going to spend a lot more time on like whatever it is that you're working on. But as you get more experience under your belt and you get to a point where it's like, you'll know you're at that point because you can now start to like figure into your head how much time it's going to take you to work on something. When you're at that point where you know exactly the amount of time it'll take you to make like let's say a 6-page comic fully colored, you do all the lettering yourself. Once you're at that point, you're at that's when I say you've hit like a professional point, because that's when you can send people quotes, and people will ask you, okay, well, like how much would you charge for this service? And you can then say like, well, paying myself at like a yada yada rate per hour, or yada yada page rate or whatever, I would give this quote. And so I'm at that point, I've been at that point for a while professionally where it's just like, I know what to expect, right, from myself for the most part when somebody is like giving me a project that they want to do, or when I give myself a project that I want to do, right? I can play around pretty well with sort of my personal expectations on when I'm going to get stuff done, how long it's going to take, all that stuff. That was a skill that did not develop all at once. It took time for it to develop. It was it came with, I'm sorry, I'm like distracted because like Hizard's arm is too short. Um, doesn't look good. Let me change that. So anyway, it came with time, and it eventually. I don't know when I noticed it. I just noticed at some point where I was just like, oh, I know exactly how much time this will take. And what's really funny too is like, even after cultivating that skill, right? I still have times where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can get this done in time. I don't know, blah blah blah. The reality is like nothing's changed. I mean, I've gotten a little faster in how quickly I work, and I've been applying that to this freelance project that I've been doing, but I'm still a little like, oh, but like, what if I'm wrong? You know, what if I'm incorrect and I actually miscalculated and then I'm late and I miss a deadline? I mean, I think what is actually going to happen is that probably after this week, the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have to dedicate pretty much completely to that freelance project. And that's when I'm going to institute a hiatus on the Legend of Redneck. Because I'm going to need all that time to complete, paid, like, very well paying work, right? That'll change the day that, either through Patreon or through other things that, like, Legend of Redneck becomes full paying work. But right now it's not full paying work, so I have to really deliberate, like, the time that I spend working on it, where it's just like, okay, I can't really work on this right now. I have to pay attention to my freelance projects, got to pay them bills, all that stuff. That is a reality that I have been largely trying to avoid as long as possible, but it's starting to settle in a little bit where I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time working on things that pay my bills. And so, probably not this year, but potentially next year, I may slow down. We'll see. I don't know. I'm kind of looking too far ahead right now. But this is the kind of stuff that I kind of think about in the back of my mind, where it's like, okay, I have to actually start considering this, right? Where it's like, okay, I may have to slow down on production to meet certain other, things in my life that need attention. And paying bills is one of them. So we'll see. Exciting, I guess. Is that exciting? It's life, And, worst comes to worst, I've been releasing Legend of Redneck on a 2-episode-a-week format. If it really came down to it, I would probably be in a situation where I would go, okay, I'll just release it on a 1-episode-a-week format. It's not my favorite idea, and I probably shouldn't even put it out there, but it is like, I don't know, it's probably good to be like transparent about that stuff and just be like, well, this is the kind of thing that happens if this or that happens, right? Like, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, okay, if I find myself in a situation where it's like, yeah, I have to really knuckle down and like get a lot of freelance work done to pay some bills, I have to like really make some ends meet here and there, or even just like other life changes that could come about, yeah, I mean, I'll have to change my release schedule for Legend of Redneck. Now, will that happen? I don't know. I have no clue. But when everything kind of like falls on your door, right, and you're the person who has to like make all those decisions, you have to kind of plan ahead a little bit and just have. I mean, this happened when I was working on Trailer Park Warlock, where I was like, okay, well, it is possible that I could be in a situation where I might have to change my release schedule, right? It never happened, fortunately. Like, things worked out all right. But, this is a different. Legend of Redneck is a different project. It has a different sort of schemata. Webtoon is not paying my bills on this one, right? It's readers like you. It's wonderful patrons that support me on Patreon, and people who send super likes and things like that. Which reminds me, I'm going to take a little moment, since we're here anyway. I might as well. Since we're here anyway, I do want to give a little shout out to all of my Patreon supporters. Eternal gratitude goes to Troy Morris and Paul Rainwater. Special thanks to Pharmacist Judge, Leo Empire, Dark Lank, Gia Fly, Sudi Shearwater, Danielle Rainwater, Matt Walters, John Durrett, Cult Member B, Austin Jackson, who is the newest member who has joined. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for helping me keep the lights on. So anyway, maybe that's too much like behind the scenes, but that's kind of stuff that goes through my mind, on days, and I'm always trying to figure out like how much behind the scenes do I want to like reveal with people, right? I imagine a lot of it is very useful information for somebody to have to give them context for like, I don't know, what a life is like as a freelance author or like as an artist. Because I never had that context when I was younger. I never really had an expectation for like what that was like and what that entailed. It just kind of seemed like, I'll tell you what it seemed like. When I was in college, I had no plan and no understanding of like how everything was going to work out. It was just like, I'll just go to school and graduate, and then I'll just do what I studied. And it doesn't really work like that. There really aren't that many degrees where you can just walk out and get a job in the field where you studied. It very rarely works that way. Not that it doesn't work out for people, it does. It's just, for most people, it's just like, okay, you study this thing and you're like, I'm going to become a engineer, and then you get out of school and it's like, we don't need any engineers right now, sorry. And then you're like, well, what do I do with this degree? Although engineering is not one of those degrees where it's like, that doesn't happen that often. Engineers are pretty wide demand anyway. But with art, I exited art school right about the time that it became apparent to me that to do what I wanted to do was going to be a very long and difficult road. And so I had made sort of a pact with myself that I really wanted to be an independent writer and artist. I'm not really sure why, and I don't really know why I thought and at all in the back of my mind that this was going to work out, but for some reason I thought it was going to work out, and so it's kind of worked out in a way. I mean, I would say like it hasn't not worked. I'll put it that way. It hasn't not worked. Is it's been a very weird trip so far because if you asked me like, "Oh, what was the plan when you got out of art school?" I was just like, I didn't really have a plan. I was just like, I'm going to start writing and start drawing and then we'll see where that goes. And that's been how it's been, right? Like I started writing, I started drawing, and then just saw how it goes, and it's been kind of random and unpredictable. And the only thing that has been predictable and not random for me has been, my own self-published work, right? It's been the one kind of thing in my life for quite some time that has been like very like, okay, I know what my expectations are around it. It's been sort of this interesting little emotional safety net to some extent. And I think that's why I still do it, to this day, because I would not say that I'm doing this because the money's great, right? I'm really happy that I have a group of solid readers who like show up, who enjoy my work, who like to talk about it, all that stuff. That's pretty wonderful. But as far as career choices go, I wouldn't recommend it. Unless you happen to have like lightning in a bottle, unless you're like you know, the person who made Lore Olympus, or I don't know, other webtoons or whatever, comic books. It's been a weird ride for me, and it has its ups and downs, and it has its positives and its negatives, and I use the negatives to teach me. I use the positives as just like encouragement, and I try and remind myself, like not to get too discouraged when things look kind of bleak, because it happens. Like there are just cycles to life where you have moments where it's like either you feel like you plateau skill wise, or you plateau monetarily or financially, and you start to think, oh well, is it just going to be like this the rest of my life? Like, is this it? And you start to wonder, like, and question all your life choices and decisions and all that stuff, and that can be difficult. That's when a lot of people do make like major career changes and major choices in their life where they're just like, I'm going to do something else, I'm going to be something else, Having the courage to sort of sit through those moments and allow them to pass is not an easy skill to cultivate. And quite frankly, like, I would say my cultivation of that skill almost is on the level of like delusional a little bit. And I've said this before in the past, and I'll always kind of repeat it to a certain extent. If you're going to be an artist and you're going to like have confidence in your work, you have to be at least a little bit delusional, like a little bit willing to at least say, yeah, I can do this, I'm going to make it happen. Because you don't really know. You don't really know if you're going to be able to make it happen. And there's going to be a lot of times where you're just like, where you're really questioning your choices. And it's not like art is the only field where that's the case. That's the case in not just fields, but like even relationship choices and other major life choices where you're just, you hit these points where you just question sort of your motives, you question what you're thinking, why you're thinking what you're thinking, all that stuff. That kind of becomes the fire that forges your iron will, if you will. If you can survive those moments, and I don't mean like literally survive, but just like metaphorically, if you can survive those moments and not give up, then you will find yourself in a place where you have a greater degree of confidence than you had previously. And, the next time it comes along, because there will be other times where it comes along, maybe not necessarily career-wise, but like in other ways, right? Where it's like you might have relationship difficulties, or you might have, these moments where maybe you made a decision for yourself, like, oh, I'm just not gonna do the traditional have a family, whatever thing, and then you have these moments where you're like, oh, well, I'm starting to really regret that decision and all that stuff. Which there are a lot of writers who do that, and that's something I've been really questioning a lot recently. Like a lot. Anyway, point being, you're going to have moments of doubt. And doubt, I used to think doubt serves a purpose, and I don't know if it's serving that purpose as much anymore. And but I would say that in the past I felt like the purpose that doubt served was as like a consulting measure, where you just have somebody who you have somebody in your collection of thinking entities, whatever. I don't know in your mind palace, your mind council, I don't know what to call it. Where you have this collection of people in your mind council. A lot of people have like a doubter, and the doubter's purpose is to just be like, have you considered other possibilities? I see that this is very important to you, but let's look at sort of the circumstances of your life right now. Let's look at, what's going on for you. Is this working out, right? The doubter is almost like break glass in case of emergency sort of a thing. However, I think there are points where you just like have to stop doubting. And you have to stop doubting yourself, and you just have to go, okay, these are the decisions I'm making, and I can change these decisions at any moment and point that I need to. But for now, I'm sticking to this track, right? I'm sticking to this, like, I'm digging my heels in, and we're going to go with this decision. And there'll be a point where, if I get to that point and I go, okay, this isn't working anymore, then you pull the ripcord and, the parachute deploys, and then, you do what you have to do. That being said, life is surprisingly more open to your desires than you are often, given to believe. Because we're usually, I don't know, I think honestly in today's world, we're often given to believe that, like, the world isn't open to our desires at all, and, like, there's only, you have to live a certain way, and blah, blah, blah. And that might be true. There's certainly circumstances in which I would say, oh yeah, that's probably true. But, opportunities abound in sort of surprising and unexpected ways, and I think regardless of like what it is that you're doing, whether it is like being an artist or you're just doing something that is kind of risky, right? Something creative, something constructive. It's risky. It's not, you know, it's not. It's outside of sort of what the normal world views as like what you're supposed to do, right? Because like what you're supposed to do is get a well-paying job in some area that you're not interested in, and you know you'll be modestly good at it. You won't really care about it. You will show up to your job, be upset all the time, or not be upset, but just not. You just won't be happy, really. You won't care. You won't have the passion. You'll just be like, okay, show up, pay bills, blah blah blah. That's generally what the world asks of us. It asks of us to just do the survival stuff that, you know, won't rock the boat, won't make things difficult, etc., etc. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. For people who make that decision, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a totally reasonable decision to make, and probably a sane decision to make, too. That's a far more sane decision to make than like I'm gonna become a roaming musician, or you know, I'm gonna I'm gonna become a YouTube streamer, or whatever it is, right? Verb says, okay, but a good paying job that you don't care about leaves some time and resources for things you do care about. That is only half true. I'm very serious about it. It is only half true because that good paying job will deplete your energy resources a lot of the time. And that is, you can ask a lot of people about that kind of stuff because there are people who can do it. They can. They're capable of it. God bless them. That's not something that everybody can do. There are a lot of people who are emotionally just drained at the end of the workday. And I don't know if I'm necessarily one of those people, but I have had experiences in the past where, yeah, I would say that's the case, where it's just like, I don't have any energy at the end of the day to be creative, or even on the weekends. Like that, it's done, right? Because I've spent all of my energy like going to my job to pay bills, and that job took all of my energy because I had to deal, you know, with my boss or with my coworkers because they're worried all the time, and I'm putting out fires constantly and blah blah blah. Okay, Verb says, I thought usually the things you would like give energy, not use it up. Everything uses up energy. First and foremost, everything uses up energy. Even things you do like. Like even if you find a really well-paying job that you do like, you're going to end up in a situation where you're at conflict between something that might be your passion thing and then your well-paying job. And quite honestly, like if you like your well-paying job more or just as much, sometimes it's better just to go with a well-paying job if that's something that you have the opportunity for. Like I can tell you right now, like I'm doing this freelance work and I like it. Like it's fun, but it takes up a lot of energy. Like it takes up a lot of creative energy. Like creative energy that I would otherwise put into Legend of Redneck is spent doing this freelance work, and like I can kind of balance it out, but I can tell like I get really fatigued after doing like a couple of comic pages of that work, and I'm just like, I can't really, I don't really have the energy to put into Legend of Redneck because I spent it doing this other thing. That's pretty common, and it becomes more common as you get older too. There are people who are able to like, you know, keep that energy going. Look, I'm trying to figure that out because I am very acutely aware that that is an issue that I could run into within the next year. But I'll put it this way. Most ways that people are able to like keep themselves running when they're in those situations is lots of caffeine. I have learned for myself that caffeine ruins my body. Not everybody has this issue. Some people can drink cup after cup after cup of coffee. They're fine. I can't do that. I wish I could. Like, I really wish I could. Because coffee's fun, first and foremost. Coffee's actually really fun. But I've learned that coffee does not agree with my body. And, like, so I've tried different things. I might go back into green tea because green tea I think I can deal with. So, like, here's what I'm saying right now. I may be dipping back into the caffeine in the future. But it's a compromise. It's a big compromise for a lot of different reasons. And sorry, I was just reading what Verb was saying. Verb says, "Okay, yeah, because it's a job. If you have to do something, even if you do it yourself, anyway, it's much worse." And so, like I said, like you may not have this problem for a long time, or you may never have this problem, but there is an issue that comes up with age as you get older. And for me, I didn't really notice it until around 34-ish. Around 34, I started to notice that my energy was much more truncated. Or not much more, but it was like I could work 10 hours a day, and then around 34, 35, 36, it was like, oh, now it's getting closer and closer to 8 hours a day before I start to really feel fatigue. And there are things that I'm doing to, like, improve that, right? Definitely, like, exercise stuff has helped a lot. But, like, even then, the older you get, you don't have the same amount of energy that you had when you were younger to carry you forward as much. And so you have to be very, not cautious, you just have to be very tactical about how you deploy your energy. Your creative energy, your, like, work energy, your all of it. Like, you just have to be more tactical about it because you get tired more easily as you get older. Or you just make a compact with the demon called caffeine, which is also fine, right? I tried that compact and it didn't work very well. Verb says, I read 1984 in like a week and loved it. Now it's going to be a mandatory school book and I won't want to read it. That's a great, like, I think Verb was mentioning that as kind of an analogy. I think I had to read that as mandatory work. I can't remember. It is a good book though. It's kind of a harsh toke of a book, but it is a good book. But yeah, it is sort of like when things become, and you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. When things become mandatory, that's what really sucks your energy the most. It's that sort of like you feel obligated to have to do something, and that really takes a lot of the passion out and a lot of the, like, forward energy, because then what happens is you have a full work day, of, like, I don't know, let's just say you have a full work day of putting cogs on machines all day long. And let's say you love putting cogs on machines. It's like, that's like a hobby for you. You would do it for free, right? And you do 8 hours of that, and then you're done with your work day, and you go home, and then you have to make dinner, or maybe you get takeout. But anyway, your commute, your commute's like another 30 minutes to an hour after you've done, putting cogs on machines or whatever. And you do the laundry, and then, by the time you're done with all that stuff, It's like 8 in the evening. And you're like, I really need to go to bed at like 10:30 or 11 so I can get back to putting cogs on machines tomorrow. I do want to work on, my novel. I would love to work on my novel, but I'm only going to have maybe at best 2 hours of work. Am I really going to get anything done? And the reality is yes, you will, actually. But it won't be a lot of work. In the back of your head, you're like, oh, it's not going to be a lot of work, and so I'd rather just save it for another day when I have more energy. People go through that cycle a lot. I've I've watched people go through that cycle quite a lot, and I've watched friends go through that cycle who are very creative people, who are wonderful artists, but I've watched them go through that cycle, and I've gone through that cycle, and I made a decision with myself, and I may go back on this decision at some point in time in my life, right? I made this decision with myself that for as long as possible as I can get away with doing this, I will reserve as much of my time to my creative energy and as much of my resources to my creative energy as possible. And, I've only been able to get away with that by saving money, by, doing a couple of financial things to help myself out. But, like, for the most part, I've come towards the end of that where it's like, okay, now it's time that I have to do other work. I have to do other jobs on the side to pay for my creative stuff. So I try and find jobs that are like where I can max out the amount that I'm earning with minimal work time. So like that minimal work time would be like 2 to 4 hours a day, right? Of like, okay, I have to do this job, which you can get away with when you're doing a creative freelance thing, because the way that people value that stuff is not as intrinsically tied to the work time, and is more intrinsically tied to the actual delivery of the product. So if you do a good job and you do it, in a short enough time, what does it matter to them necessarily how much it costs? Like, that's kind of the reasoning, right? You just don't make it particularly transparent to them, as best as you can. But ultimately, and also there are other costs you have to pay on the side when it's stuff like, especially when it's graphic design stuff. There's a lot of costs because you have to pay for fonts. Fonts aren't expensive, but you have to pay for fonts and stock images and stuff like that. But anyway, I guess I'll try and finish up some other stuff that I was going to do on this page. Anyway, my point is, you try and find those jobs, and usually they're going to be more like freelance jobs or like client type situations where you have somebody who's just like, I need somebody to do this job within this kind of amount of time turnaround. Can you do it? And you look for jobs that are like, they're technical, they're specific to a certain area that you're good at, right? And not too many people are as good at it as you are. And they come at enough of a premium that somebody really does understand and see the value of what they're paying for that job. Well, that's an ideal side hustle. So anyway, like in regards to the freelance job that I'm doing right now, it gets pretty close to, I would say, is like, it's an ideal side hustle. Although it's actually the actual hustle. And really, honestly, Legend of Redneck is technically kind of the side hustle. But anyway, I'm speaking in terms of like financially, technically. So this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which was as you do a profession, as you get better at it, as you sort of have a better understanding on how you're using your time and the amount of, effort and work it requires and the amount of like literal time goes into it, and you get better at managing your time, that is when you can get to this place of I'm trying to figure out how to put this of like of using that to your advantage, I guess, where you can find jobs where you're like, oh yeah, I can do that lickety split. Like that'll only take me like a couple hours. But for the client you're working with, it's very crucial to them. They'll pay at a premium for it, right? For you to get it done. And, you can use that to your own advantage to help you sort of pay for whatever it is like your passion project is. Um, no, not everything, like there's not that many things that are like that. They exist. And also they're sort of miraculous when they do show up, but they do show up and they do happen. Because the ultimate, here's the ultimate thing, right? Here's sort of like the philosophical, or not necessarily philosophical, but like the TLDR, I guess you could say. Once you add everything up, here's sort of like the reality of everything. The way that work is evaluated is completely arbitrary. Now, we have laws that try and make it less arbitrary, right? Like you have labor laws that try and make it less arbitrary that say like, well, minimum wage. So like in Louisiana, the minimum wage is like $7 an hour, which is incredibly low compared to the rest of the nation. But anyway, that's the minimum wage here, right? And that sets a standard for how companies pay people for their work for salary jobs. Once you get out of salary type work, once you get into sort of what I would call project work, where it's like, you're either self-employed or whatever, but you're self-employed and some business or some client needs you to do some kind of work for them. So if you're an artist, you find an individual who's usually independently wealthy. You find an individual who, so for this example, you're an artist and you find an individual, or an individual finds you. They need you to do like a painting for them, right? They need you to do like a self-portrait, let's say. They want you to do an oil canvas self-portrait. It's a big one. It's like a 8 foot by 8 foot. Well, I guess it wouldn't be 8 foot by 8 foot. It would be like a 8 foot by 5 foot self-portrait, or maybe those proportions don't sound right. Anyway, it's big, right? But you're such a professional artist, and you're so good at it that you're like, oh, I could do that. I could do that in a couple of nights, right? So that's how you do that, right? And like, you get the job done. They just want you to complete the job. They don't care how fast you can do it or how slow you can do it. They just want you to do it. And they ask you, how much would that be? And then you name a price, right? And if they agree with the price, if they like the price, bada bing, bada boom, it works out, right? That is your ideal commission, right? Most commissions are not that ideal, at least at the level of artist that I'm at. Now, if for some reason, I don't know, if for some reason, tomorrow morning I woke up and I was like, I don't know, like a world-class artist. I don't even know that those exist anymore, but if I was a world-class artist suddenly, and people were banging on my door for, paintings of whatever, I don't know, whether it's, they're just like, I just want to commission you. I want to commission you to do a self-portrait, or I want to commission you to do a cartoon character or whatever. Suddenly, I would be in a position where I can kind of start to name my own prices within reason, right? You can't just say like, $1 million for everything, as tempting as that is. But when you're in that position where you can auction, right, to a certain extent, your skill, you have a lot of wiggle room for what you can charge people for your skills. And so that was the situation with my current, project that I'm working on, my current freelance project. I was in a position where, I could give a quote. I gave what I thought was a pretty reasonable quote for the amount of time it was going to take to make what I'm making and for my skill level. And also for like what was asked for in the project, because basically I was asked to do the whole thing front to back. And so I was like, okay, well that's what y'all want. Then I will add a premium onto that because that is a lot of work and that's a lot of time, and I'd like to be fairly compensated for that, right? That, by the way, is a skill that has taken me years to learn and acquire, and I'm still learning it. I'm not like amazing at it, but I'm gotten a lot better at it because it's fairly common for artists to sort of downbid themselves when they're quoting people on sort of like what they feel like their skill is worth. And I could even imagine that that's become even more common nowadays when you have things like Midjourney or like, AI image generation stuff. And the reality is like I said, the value for work is outside of no, yeah, this is the reality. The value for work is arbitrary. You can charge whatever it is that you feel that your client is willing to be charged. And understanding what that willingness is takes a certain amount of it's hard for me to call it a skill because it's very I don't know, it's largely intuitive. It's largely like guesswork, but it also kind of comes with like the standards that sort of get set up in the past, right? And just from like previous work experience. And you go, okay, well, I charge this much for that job. I charge that much for that job. I think that this job would be worth this much. It's a very unusual experience, by the way. I should say, like, the first time that you find yourself doing that, you're going to feel weird. You're going to feel like, the thought that comes, I think, to most people's mind when they're in that position is like, well, I don't want to rob them. And it's like, the reality is like, you're not going to rob them because if the price is too high, they'll just say no. They'll just say, no, that's too high for me. Can we, like, negotiate a price lower than that? And so you negotiate down, right? But you start with the highest amount you think is appropriate. And you just pick a number, Just pick a number. Pick a number that sounds good for you. And then you negotiate from that number. And, that's the way that the world actually really works most of the time. We don't, like, if you're working like a salaried job, you don't see that part of the world. And that's because, your employers have done that work for you. Like, they have basically made that auction for you and have said, okay, I think that person's time spent is worth this amount. And, depending on the situation socially or globally or whatever, you can have some room to negotiate, right? You do have room to negotiate your salary if it's a salary job, depending on what it is, right? Like if it's a highly professional, technical, sort of skill-based thing, like let's say you're a coder, let's say you're an engineer, let's say you're, I don't know, an accountant maybe even. Things like that, you do have room to negotiate sort of like what you feel like you're worth. And also like just the amount of money that you need, right? that's a hard-earned skill, and it takes a lot of experience to get to that point where you've sort of learned how to navigate that, and also learning where to kind of like meet people where they need to be met too. Because sometimes you do have people who it's like, well, they might be a really good client and they might not be able to quite fully afford you, so you figure out where to make compromises. Anyway, that's a huge topic, right? Um, we could go further into that, but I will probably let that rest in just a moment. But it is something that I think about a lot because I've had to think about a lot, right? It's something that comes with the territory of like being a freelance artist and like dealing with that stuff is you have to navigate not just like how people value your work, but like how you value your own work. And in the back of your head, you might think, well, I just want my work to be valued as the highest price possible. And some people are fortunate enough that they can do that, right? Some people are fortunate enough that they can just be like, oh yeah, this painting's worth a bajillion dollars. But most people aren't in that situation. They have to be more tactical and more methodical, or more. See, logical or reasonable is not the right word to use because it's really not logical. It's really not reasonable. The way that these processes work function on a logic and reason that's so flexible and flimsy that it's very difficult for me to call it logic. Um, what I would instead call it is like I don't know what. I mean, it's an irrational kind of logic. That's how most economies function, is by an irrational sort of logic. Like, yeah, there's kind of a logic in it if you spend enough time reasoning it out. But the logic is not like it's not math. I'll put it that way. It looks like math, but it's not math. um, it doesn't function like math, but it kind of sounds like math. And that is my summary of what I've learned so far about being a professional artist. Hopefully that's useful in some way. Anyway, I think I'm gonna hang it up and get ready for a class I want to go to in a little bit. But anyway, thanks for hanging out. Everybody hung out. Hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, whatever's going on for you. We will talk again soon. And until then, bye bye.